Okay, we're back. Good local time to you, sir. Sam Forman, one of the founders from Strdy.finance. Welcome, sir. It's fantastic to have you here.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, man. Just been hearing quite a lot about what you guys have been doing. I know that you've been busy. You've been quietly like chipping away. You've done something quite unique. You guys launched a project. You didn't launch a token. Goodness me, how did you manage to do that? 25 million, what, 20, it's close to 25 million in TVL on your
Yep.
protocol. Tell us a bit about yourself, what you guys have been doing, who you are. You know, do you have any samurai swords on your table? What's your vibe, sir?
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks again for having me on. My name's Sam. I'm the founder of Strdy. Um, my personal background, I'm like a total math and computer science geek. I've been interested in cryptography since I was in high school, and that's really how I got into crypto. Initially, I was kind of abrasive that crypto stole cryptography's namesake, but came around over time. Was like vaguely familiar with crypto during DeFi summer, but then really started getting into it in early 2021. And then ended up starting Strdy about 9 months later, in late 2021. And like I mentioned, my background's in cryptography. And so that was how I initially got into it, but really fell in love sort of with the applications and lending in particular.
So in terms of I mean, you haven't been around for very long, and you kind of like you're essentially like in the deep end now with this bear market that we're currently experiencing at the moment. How are you finding that? I mean, it's like, you obviously hear all these stories. I know that we kind of like not getting to the point of Strdy, but I'm really interested to find out, like, what are your thoughts around kind of like being in the space right now, being relatively new to this whole idea of a market that's turned? I mean, what is your perception around it, and what are your thoughts around kind of like the lunacy that's currently going on, particularly on crypto Twitter? Because I mean, we definitely will agree on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I started Sturdy right around like the top. So it's kind of been, the only environment that I'm really familiar with is like the one we're currently in.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, I think it's definitely been uniquely challenging to build and grow. Especially I think as you mentioned, we're a project without a token right now, and so there's no like kind of liquidity mining incentives or anything like that. And so it's difficult. It's like an uphill battle to grab mind share, but I think it's also really useful because there's no kind of crutches or training wheels here. There's the only way to grow is to build something that users want and that meets their needs. And so it's really forced us to like innovate and constantly shift based on what users demand until we've really gotten something right.
Yeah. So have you guys, I mean, have you managed to kind of like figure out, like, on your own, like, okay, this is a strategy we're going to do, or is it something that's just kind of played out where, we've got funds, we've managed to raise some funds, we started this project, and now we're in the middle of this bear market, but you know what? It's fine because we're continuing to just do what it is that we're doing, or have you had to rethink the way that you've approached things?
Yeah, we've definitely made small pivots, and I'm sure we'll get deeper into Surdy, but when we first started out, our model was different from what it is now. It was really more about um, enabling like high yield lending and interest free borrowing, specifically for like to enable borrowers to get spot leverage. So they might be able to like borrow USDC against their ETH at 0% interest. And we've moved away from that in favor of leveraged yield farming. And it's
Okay.
kind of similar mechanically, but the assets we're supporting are much different. How we're framing it's different. And so, yeah, there's a lot of changes that we've had to make in part because that's what we've heard from users.
Awesome. So you guys have obviously dialed into your community. Community said, listen, this is what we need. That's actually really cool because, I mean, I've spoken to a number of projects where, the community's gone quiet on them. And it's not because they don't have a great relationship. It just kind of, it almost was like their community saying that, listen, we don't actually see a use in your protocol in the current moment in time. And I think that's like a really difficult like space to navigate. Like a community says, well, we don't really think your protocol is really that relevant. you're going to have to rethink entirely what it is that you're doing, or we're just going to have to wait for, like you said, I mean, you described it beautifully, for those crutches, you know. And okay, so you started, how long have you guys been going for now exactly?
Yeah, so we've been on ETH mainnet since about March of 2022.
Okay, so it's still very much early days for you guys. I mean, it seems like you have kind of like been through the storms. I mean, we are going into the new year. Yeah, you're still around. You've got great TVL. I mean, that's what speaks. You know, we could carry on about how amazing you guys are, but at the end of the day, it's like TVL's there, and that's awesome. So well done on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So where did you guys? Okay, so I think just on the basics, let's get stuck into, you know, what exactly is Strdy. I mean, you've touched on it, but let's start at the beginning and then just work through, you know, what it is that you guys do and how you're doing it.
Yeah, so we are a new kind of lending protocol that enables users to get leverage yields on farms in protocols like Convex and Yearn. And so the way we accomplish this is by supporting staked assets as collateral. So on Strdy, you can use like a Convex LP token or like Yearn LP token as collateral. And I'll just kind of use Convex as an example from here on out. So you might use your like Convex Frax USDC as collateral, borrow stablecoins against that position, and then lever up, right? So you put those like stablecoins back into Convex, which you'd use as collateral as Strdy, and you know, kind of loop from there. And one of the things that makes Strdy really unique is rather than paying a fixed interest rate on that loan, or kind of like a set percentage that you have to pay, instead you forego a portion of the yield. So it's almost like we call it kind of a decentralized yield farming fund model, where you might be forgoing like 40% of the yield, right?
Okay.
And what happens is that that yield then goes back to the lender who's supplying the USDC that you're borrowing in order to lever up. And so you have these two sides. You have these borrowers who tend to be larger size and a little bit more advanced, who are deploying borrowed funds into farms like Convex, which they're using on Strdy as collateral to lever up. So instead of earning, you know, maybe 3% APY on Convex, they can get up to 10x leverage on Strdy. And even if they're foregoing half of that, that's still 15% APY, which is super competitive. And then on the lender side, they're earning a portion of that yield from that Convex farming. And right now, I think it's been sitting around 5 to 6%.
Well, that's actually really compelling. I mean, I think the natural question to ask is like, what is the risk? You know, like how extensive is the risk in this whole thing, and then how have you guys managed kind of like the liquidation and the aspects around that? So could you? I mean, we might as well just get into it. I mean, that is the crux of the whole thing at the end of the day. You know, it's kind of like, it's all good and well that you're going to get your 10x, but you know, what are the extent of the risks around that, and then how do you guys manage the liquidations?
Yeah, so beyond the normal smart contract risks, you also have this third-party contract risk. So as I mentioned, like we interact with Convex, for example. And so if Convex were exploited in the particular pool that we're supporting, it would affect both lenders and borrowers on Strdy. And so to mitigate that, we're super conservative with who we integrate. Right now on ETH mainnet, and I should correct, we actually launched in June 2022. We launched on Phantom in March initially. But on ETH mainnet, we only integrate Convex and Lido right now. We're going to add Aura. And on Phantom, we only integrate Yearn at the moment. And so, you know, there's a lot higher APY farms if you want. Like we could get really degen with it, but we don't. We intentionally keep it kind of very small to assets that pass our risk framework. Then I think a second risk is if you're levering up and there's a depeg, you will get liquidated. So I mentioned this example use case earlier where you can use your Convex Frax BPA as collateral and take out like USDC as a loan and lever up that way. But if Frax depegs, you know, even like 10% and you're at 10x leverage, you're going to get liquidated. And so that's definitely a risk to be cognizant of if you're a borrower and using the leverage feature. And then I think the last thing you asked about was liquidations. And our liquidation mechanism is pretty similar to Aave or Compound in that anyone can be a liquidator. It's totally decentralized. And generally, you know, the in practice, we don't we run our own bots, but we don't win most of the liquidation. So it's third parties usually doing it. And the liquidator essentially receives a portion of the collateral and then repays the borrower's loan in return. So they're kind of profiting because the portion of collateral they receive is greater than the size of the loan that they're repaying. Kind of the twist that makes Strdy different is that before liquidation, we immediately unstake the asset, right? So we would unstake it from Convex so that the liquidator is receiving the curve LP. And that's all of our staking is completely liquid, right? So there's no, it's not like we do the convex staking where it takes 2 weeks to unwind, for example.
Okay, so I mean, what I find interesting about the whole mechanic around, especially like with Frax, is that is there a way to develop something or to have a mechanism that would essentially almost be like, I don't know if the right word is like a cushion or kind of like a buffer that would prevent, like that 10% move, to kind of like mitigate that 10% move over a period of time to allow for, the peg to reintroduce itself. Because for me, that seems like quite a big risk, So if I'm like doing this and I'm wanting to get involved, I mean, Frax has been really good. I mean, we've seen some really good results from Frax. I mean, I'm not surprised that you guys chose that. But I'm just curious, is there like a liquidation engine that could be potentially developed that could essentially take up a period of time where it is a buffer that prevents, like an immediate liquidation around a DPEG, especially when the DPEG isn't going to land up being a long-term thing?
Yeah, well, I think that's the question: is how would you develop a mechanism that only provides that cushion? Because if you had that for something like UST, it would have been really devastating for lenders.
Yes.
And so right now we don't have that. We do partial liquidations though, so 50% of your position gets liquidated at maximum. So there's that. There's a couple interesting twists you can do though. So one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is making it so an asset like Frax can be borrowed. And why that's interesting is, as a borrower, if you're like levering against Frax USDC and you're borrowing Frax and Frax DPEGs, you actually wouldn't get liquidated. Because your debt is denominated in Frax as well. And so they kind of, both your assets and your debt lower equally. And yeah, I think there's a lot you could do, potentially spinning up a new almost like instance of the protocol that is all unliquidatable. That's something that I've been thinking about a little bit. It's not on the short-term roadmap now, but I think if we figured out a way to pull that off, it would be really compelling.
I think that, I mean, because at the end of the day, it's like you don't want to lose customers, right? At the end of the day, it's like you want to keep your customers. You don't necessarily want them to be liquidated, especially if they're going to stick around for the long term. You're going to end up probably making a lot more money out of the process through fees and the rest of it. So it's almost like a liquidation engine that protects in short periods or over a short period of time, when you get a DPEG or if you get, market instability. It would be interesting to see how the space evolves, around more sophisticated liquidation engines that kind of manage that. And then you charge people a premium for it. It's kind of like we've developed this thing. It's like super cool. It's big brain stuff. You won't get liquidated outright with, rapid market movements, but it's going to land up costing you a little bit extra. Are you happy with that? And I promise you, every single one of us would be like, cool, bring it on, So
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see. Yeah.
I think the issue is on the lender side, where like if I'm lending USDC to Strdy and there's this mechanism that doesn't guarantee solvency. To me, that would be concerning if
Okay.
I had any kind of doubts about the collateral. So I mean, that's the only thing. I think it's a trade-off. Is you're balancing. I totally agree from a borrower's perspective. That's awesome that I'm not
Yeah.
getting liquidated. But then for the lender, it's like, oh, what happens if it keeps going down and then I don't get my funds back. So it's just
Correct.
yeah, playing that balancing act.
Cool. Well, we'll definitely check in, and maybe in a year's time, maybe in 6 months' time, I'm going to get a message from you on Telegram. Listen, dude, I figured it out.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious. I'm really curious around why Phantom initially. What was the thinking around Phantom? I'm sure you've been asked this question before, but I'd like to just get into that because obviously Andre posted that Medium article a few days ago, which I found really interesting in terms of how he's now stepping into a different role. But let's just go back to why you guys were looking at Phantom from the onset.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember back to like March 2022, I think Phantom flipped like Avalanche and maybe even Solana in terms of TVL. It was really big.
Yeah,
Um, and the yields were also super compelling. So initially, like what we were building is a little bit different from today. It was more we were still using staked assets as collateral, but it was like staked FTM, and then you would borrow USDC. And so it's a different use case from a borrower's perspective, and demand for that kind of leverage actually went down quite a bit. And so that's part of why we pivoted. But for those yields, Phantom was very compelling at the time. Like Yearn had fantastic yields for all the Phantom blue chips. So it was kind of that combination. It was like very hot in terms of TVL growth, and then the yields for collateral assets were extremely compelling relative to stablecoins, which, based on kind of the model at the time, was something that made sense for us.
yeah. I mean, I think that what I'm finding really interesting is that back then it was like an obvious thing. You had Avalanche, you had Phantom. You had like Metis was still trying to find it. Well, it was really like it kind of like hit a brick wall on onset, and then it was like finding its feet in March. And I think in many ways it still is finding its feet as an ecosystem. And now you've obviously got Arbitrum, and that's my next question. When Arbitrum? I mean, what's the thinking around that? I mean, I see you smiling. It seems to be maybe something that you guys are looking at. What's happening there?
Yes, it is definitely something we have been considering, and I've gotten a bunch of messages about that recently, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for our roadmap, we're building towards this release, which is going to come out about 2 weeks from today, on December 20th, called Strdy 1.0. And so we'll talk about that. There's a bunch of new features there. But then at some point after that is probably when we'll launch an Arbitrum. The great thing about our model is that it's very easily reproducible on other chains, and it's very novel. Like, it's not just going to be Strdy on ETH, but lower fees. Will be integrating new projects. So you can imagine like
Yeah.
GLP, or I think yeah, like Rage, which I know is integrating with GLP now for a delta neutral vault. And so, yeah, like I think there will be totally novel strategies that I'm really excited about, because there is, as you mentioned, so much cool stuff going on in that ecosystem right now.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's where's the money flowing? Where's the liquidity? Who's accessing it? Who's interested in what products? And obviously, at the moment, like the whole thing is around GMX and GLP, and the success that they've kind of cultivated in this market. And it's going to be really interesting to see how you guys use those products. I mean, I'm dying to see. It's going to be it really is what's going to change, I think, the next narrative for the next bull market. The last bull market was all about Ponzi's. It was all about these crazy ideas that everyone knew were unsustainable, but we were too busy having fun and too busy making money and crashing and burning that we didn't really think of like the long-term play around this thing. Like, how do we extend these ideas? And obviously the kind of stuff that you guys are doing now, and I'm really interested to hear about Strdy 1.0 that should be 2.0, but we'll get into that. Is how you guys, I mean, are you guys looking at this thing of a perspective around we're going to create a network of possibilities that we can incorporate other projects into what it is that we're doing? Or is it just going to be, well, we'll use your assets or your collateral, and we'll feed into that liquidity, and then we'll offer the service off our doorstep? How are you guys looking at this thing from a business perspective, business plan perspective?
Yeah, I think definitely the integrations with our partners, a lot of them have been very multifaceted. So I'll give you an example. I mentioned that we're soon going to be integrating Aura, which is kind of like Convex for Balancer. Um, and So like our main integration is going to be that you can lever up, and so you'll be able to, for example, get like 10x leverage on Aura ST ETH, and so you'll get insane yields on your staked ETH. I'm super excited about that. But then we're also integrating like balancer flash loans, and why we do that is so that you can lever up in a single click, and they have feeless flash loans as well. So rather than like, I kind of mentioned that example earlier where it's like you're depositing convex LPs, borrowing against that, depositing that into convex. That's actually not how you would do it in practice. We have a slider, and you can just slide it up, one click, you're done. And then we're also going to have a balancer LP where you can like deposit Strdy USDC, Strdy DAI, Strdy USDT, which are like the staked versions of those assets in Strdy, and swap between them, and also like gain access to all of those yields simultaneously. So totally, I think with each of our partners, there are multiple levels to the ways that we integrate them and the way that they integrate us.
So are you looking at each project? Well, are you looking at each partner that you guys get into business with as a unique approach? It's kind of like, well, the product. So, for example, if we look at GLP has a staking mechanism. Obviously, it's very similar to, staking on other protocols. But is it going to be a different approach, or is it a similar approach to the way that you incorporate that into Strdy?
I see. So it's roughly similar. I mean, on like a technical level, there are definitely some bespoke pieces just based on whatever the staking and unstaking mechanisms are. But generally, it's pretty similar in that like the borrower, as soon as they deposit the asset, we automatically stake it. And then we harvest the yield every 24 hours, and it's kind of that yield is split between the borrower and the lender.
Okay, gotcha. So tell us about why it's version 1.0 and what's the thinking behind, what you guys had originally built as a foundation and how things are going to be different going forward now.
Yeah, totally. So the reason why we called it 1.0 is we really see this as just getting to the starting line. Even though I mentioned we've been on ETH mainnet since June, the product has matured so much since then and is still maturing. But kind of with this release, we really view this as, okay, we have this thing that users really seem to like. We've refined it. And with this kind of release, will be a version that we're incredibly proud of, that we can stand behind, that we're confident that users enjoy and fits a real need for them. Right now, we're the largest lending protocol on Ethereum with no token. And we've kind of gotten there through that focus on delivering things that users want. So that's kind of why the name is, we see it as the starting point for us. We're from a product perspective, I'm like, it's a 0 to 1 improvement. The UI is just so much better than what we have now, and I'm really excited to start showing that off. In terms of what the release itself will contain, there's really 3 big components that I can share publicly right now, as well as some things that you'll hear more about in the days leading up to it. The first is a totally new UI, as I mentioned, and we'll be like kind of sharing screenshots, but way more intuitive. My goal with this was to make it so that you can understand how Strdy works without having to read the docs. And that's a tall requirement. I think Strdy is a little bit complex, and DeFi in general is complex.
Yeah.
But I'm really proud of how we did, and I think we're going to be making it even better based on feedback from users over time. So that's one, is the new UI. 2 is the ETH market I mentioned. So right now you can only lend stablecoins on Strdy and get leverage on stablecoin denominated assets like Curve, Frax USDC, and similar kind of convex LPs. But users also want great ETH yields and leverage on ETH denominated assets. I mentioned Aura, WST ETH, like convex ST ETH, other assets like that. Convex or I think Aura RETH once they come out with the Chainlink Oracle for that. So yeah, that's 2, is that ETH market. 3 is more security features. So for example, we'll be releasing our 3rd audit, this one from QuantStamp. And then there's some other fun surprises that we will be announcing in the coming weeks.
Thanks for sharing that. I wanted to just quickly tap into kind of like something that's seemingly a small aspect of this whole thing, because it's something that people don't really talk about, is obviously, the security audit that goes into a project. And it's probably not a question that, I would necessarily ask somebody, and I'm sure it's not a question that you would get asked a lot of the time, because it's kind of like this multifaceted kind of like Pandora's box, and people don't quite understand it. And I mean, in all intents and purposes, as a geek, it's the most wonderful thing, from a security aspect, audits and the rest of it. It's great, because I've recently started researching this topic, and it does my head in. For what it's worth, it really does my head in. But I'm just curious, in terms of Strdy's approach to this whole thing, how do you approach the auditing aspect of this business? Is it just I got a recommendation from a friend and, we're going to just go with a company, or is there a due diligence process that you undergo where you actually put the company that's doing this audit to task based on certain criteria? I mean, what is your methodology around the audits and the way that you approach it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things is that at this point, they all have pretty extensive public track records. So you can go and see, part of it's like a proxy, like if Aave and MakerDAO have hired these guys, they're probably pretty good. Like especially if they've done it more
Yeah.
recently. And so it helps when they have a track record of working with great projects. One, like two is making sure that like have the projects that they've audited been exploited, right? And the code that they've audited in particular. And so I think that is super important to look at. And then three, I think also looking at the reports themselves, like how thorough are they? A lot of times they'll talk about their methodology in pretty decent detail. So you can learn about like how many auditors are looking at it, what approaches are they doing? Is it manual, some kind of like formal analysis? And so, yeah, like just understanding what their approach is. But yeah, I think it's a combination of that. And there's also just like a general sense of the reputation, whether that be from like other projects or, what you read on crypto Twitter. But yeah, it's definitely tough. I mean, I think at this point, there's like a solid set of reputable firms. One of the hardest things is the wait times, which have come down a ton since when we were
Yeah,
launching
obviously.
in
Yeah,
March.
yeah.
But still, it's a different development process, right? Because you need to have the code like frozen months ahead of time and then submit it and then make these changes. And so it just makes the iterative cycle that much longer.
Have you heard of a website and essentially an auditing? I don't know. It's not really. They're not a company. They're called Code for Arena. Where
Yes,
what are your
not only have we heard of them, but we also used them for our previous
awesome?
audit.
Okay, yeah. So for people that are listening and that are viewing, Code for Arena essentially it's almost like it's a league. It's essentially you participate in some kind of a league where projects put up money, and it's a competition between parties to see who can find vulnerabilities in the code, and then that becomes like a bounty that gets given out to, is it like the top 3, top 5, top person who finds an exploit? How does that work, Sam, from a collective perspective?
Yeah, basically there's different categories. So there's like medium, high, low levels of severity. And then if you report, in the highest and it gets approved, it turns out that it's correct, it's a valid exploit, then you'll get this much money and, so on. There's like a
Nice.
pool that
Yeah.
gets split between all the correct submissions.
So you guys did Code for Arena, and you obviously got someone to come in and do like a bespoke audit. Cool. Well, that kind of puts it to rest for me in terms of you guys covering all your bases. Thank you, sir. I would never have asked this question in the past.
No, I think
But
it's super important. Yeah.
it is,
And
yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, and a lot of the exploits that are happening at the moment are just obvious. It just seems like a lot of the stuff that's come out was always there. It was been exposed. Well, it's been present for months, and no one actually picked up on it. And just because someone didn't want to pay the money, the project loses millions of dollars. Anyways, just out of curiosity, why not UniV3 in terms of doing something with them?
yes, I think we very likely will in the future.
Okay.
We haven't heard a ton of demand for that. I think on like a risk adjusted basis, the yields on convex tend to be better for
Better. Yeah.
like stable pairs. So if you're, like the USDC DAI pair on Uni isn't doing nearly what like a similar pair would do on Convex. And so, that's something to consider. I think what will be interesting is if there's demand for like a USDC ETH LP on Uni to be used as collateral, either, kind of borrowed against, or I guess, using that as collateral to borrow USDC or ETH, or, which one, and kind of levering up, because the yields on that are a lot more compelling. But there's also a lot more risk, right? Because then the liquidation, it's not just a DPEG, it's a fluctuation in price. And so there's a ton more of risk there. And so, I have some ideas about how you could do that, like some kind of structured product that could manage the liquidation risk over time and like close the position if it's getting risky. So it's something that's on our roadmap for sure.
In terms of non-US dollar stablecoins, is that something that has come up on your radar? What is the thinking around that at the moment?
Yeah, there hasn't been a ton of demand for that. I think the USD stablecoins are still by far the most popular. But then there's also like all the ETH use cases too. And so I think after like stablecoins, ETH is the most popular asset for getting yields.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously Circle got into, the euro, the non-US dollar, euro being obviously the next primary one. I think, in terms of the projects that we've been speaking to, DFX was one of them. They pretty much cover all the currencies, and they've seen quite a bit of demand, So I think, going forward, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I mean, there's a lot of people that have, this idea that stable coins are going to be the biggest market share going forward, whether it's in 6 months, a year, it doesn't matter. And it seems plausible, whether it's the Aussie dollar, the euro, US dollar. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, and then how you guys obviously structure your offerings into the future. So we'll keep an eye on that. My next question, in terms of, the different strategies that people can get into. So kind of like, obviously a big part of, kind of like the DeFi thing. And, obviously as a bunch of DJs, there's always kind of like the gamification side of it. Have you seen like interesting strategies that have come out of this whole thing, just through leverage, through this process, and how people are maximizing their returns, with maximum risk versus, low risk? I mean, what's kind of played out over the last few months in terms of what you guys have observed? Just really interested to hear.
It's a great question. And really what we observed is, initially that's what we thought. We thought it was going to be very complex, but it turns out that most people really want a relatively simple set of strategies. And I actually think this is our biggest advantage over competitors, is that rather than being kind of disparate and enabling a lot of different strategies, we only enable a few, but we're really good at the ones we enable. So I'll give you an example. There's like this like convex leverage I mentioned, and we noticed that people were like depositing and borrowing, and it was taking, doing that manually and taking like 20 steps and $1,000 in gas. And so at that point, that was when we were like, oh, let's just make this one click automated. And so that way they don't have to do that. And I think you could literally see on our TVL graph, like it made a huge difference for us when we enable that, even though it's like the same thing, it's just a convenience feature, but it made a big difference. And so, yeah, a lot of it has been just like looking at common user patterns and building features around that. And it's funny you mentioned gamification, because that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and how we can kind of improve that. And that's another thing that I think 1.0, along with the community, will be trying to build is, seeing who's the most like elite farmer on Strdy and that kind of thing, because it's, I think it's a huge part. Like users, they're not just making money, but they're really into DeFi because it's fun and interesting, and they get some entertainment value out of it.
So, I mean, I want to get into that, because I think like, the whole idea of leaderboards and, like there's almost like an accountability to, what it is that people are doing on the protocol. I think there's definitely a scope for that. I mean, that's like another page on your UI that you could incorporate, and could be super fun, you know, from that perspective. And then you can reward people who do that, and then it's like encourages more degeneracy, not in a negative way, but, you know, more creative thinking around how guys can essentially like gamify this thing to the next level, and seeing where it lands up, because at the end of the day we are experimenting here. You know, DeFi is this very interesting experimentation around, you know, how do we make money work in a constructive, positive way that's sustainable, and, you know, people benefit from the whole thing, as opposed to just banks, you know, and how banks have benefited for the last few hundred years, or whatever the case is. I wanted to ask a question around, like, if I wanted to get involved, like from another, so LayerZero, is that something that you guys have looked into in terms of like offering your product in a LayerZero context, and say, guys, have you spoken to the LayerZero guys? Because say now, for example, I have a whole lot of liquidity that's sitting on Arbitrum right now, you know, and I don't want to bridge. Is there an opportunity for you guys to be able to actually incorporate, you know, that liquidity into, you know, this lending and borrowing mechanism that you guys have got through the LayerZero thing? Is it something that you've considered?
Yeah, I've thought about it a little bit. To be honest, it kind of scares me, doing too much like the cross-chain lending, because it makes the attack surface so much larger. And it makes it so, like, even if one bridge goes down on one chain, then like your whole protocol could be compromised potentially. And so for me, it's not something that I think we'll be considering in the near term, because it's still relatively new. This is something that Aave is rolling out as part of their V3. And so, you know, if they're able to pull this off with tens of billions of dollars for a period of many months, then I think then that's something we would take more seriously. But this is one of the areas where I'm okay not being the innovator and like the one to push the
Yeah.
envelope. I think we'll kind of let someone else do that. And if it ends up working and it's secure and there's like best practices, at that point, it's probably something that we would take another look at. And of course, we're, you know, as governance becomes more decentralized, it won't be up to me. But yeah.
So that was this. I've essentially got two questions. The first question is that, you know, you guys managed to get this project going kind of towards the tail end of the bull market. You're still in business. Clearly, you guys are generating fees. You're able to. Are you guys sustainable at the moment, or are you still reliant on a kind of like a funding mechanism from your raise that you're relying on from a, you know, like in terms of what your runway is? Or are you guys pretty much self-sufficient, or not?
No, we're
there
not
yet?
profitable. We're not profitable yet, like net salaries.
Okay. So, and then in terms of where you guys are at, because the reason why I'm asking that is that you guys never approached this thing from a raise that generated a token, so that the token could then obviously create this marketability thing for you guys. How have you approached that from a business model perspective? Has it always been your intention to create a business that would generate enough fees to create a sustainable business, or is there possibly a little bit of alpha here around a token being released later on in your journey?
Yeah, I've always thought about it more from like a product perspective in terms of why we haven't released a token to date. Because I think it's possible to build a really large protocol that doesn't have product market fit, um, if you have a token and you're just like releasing incentives. I think by getting to where we are without a token, we've kind of proven that there's some level of demand for what we're building, because otherwise there'd be no reason for them to for our users to be deposited in Strdy. And so, yeah, that's how I've thought about it. I'm less kind of thinking about the business case. I'm very confident that that will like come together, in part because we're generating a good amount of fees without focusing on monetization. And so I think over time, I mentioned this idea of like building out structured products. So making it so that we're managing, users can like do one-click leverage, but they're also liquidation protected. So we'll automatically wind down their position. We can like allocate between different staked collateral assets, that sort of thing. And on that, that's a product where we can take much higher fees because, you know, it's kind of more advanced. It might be like 30% APY or something. And so, to take
Yeah.
3 or 4% off of that is really still not much. Yeah, but I think in terms of like sustainability, that's something that's super important and something that as we like grow is going to become even more of a focus.
I think that's really interesting, because I honestly don't think that I have spoken to many projects that released a product that had an intention to create a sustainable model around the pure business case, which is clearly what it is that your strategy is here. So I find that to be remarkable, especially in this space. But it's so bloody obvious, isn't it? Like we kind of have this expectation that, okay, well, they're going to release a token and it's going to be vested and all this like crazy stuff, which actually isn't really necessary, because all that is, it's kind of like this excuse to try and generate a whole lot of like hype and market capability, when in reality it's not really needed. Because are we fulfilling a need? Yes, we are. What is that need? Well, it's X, Y, and Z, lending and borrowing with leverage, so you can be as much of a degen as you want. If that's what you want, you don't need a token to do that. And then we'll create a whole lot of products around that. So, I mean, that's essentially the summary here. And if we wanted to launch a token, we could, but we're not, because we want to ultimately create a business that can do all these things on multiple ecosystems, and we can make some really good money out of this thing, and we can offer a service that people want. That's essentially what I'm reading into this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how I've been thinking about it. I think, I mean, maybe to represent the flip side a little bit, I do think even though people meme about governance, it is still pretty important. Like I don't love the fact that right now it's kind of me and the team deciding on things like parameters and new collateral assets, because we're not like the ultimate stakeholders, right? The users who have their like funds on the platform are. And so obviously we always consult with them. We always like have community calls and pose these kind of questions to the community. But I do think that um, it's become more and more important to have like formal process for that sort of thing, as
Yes.
opposed to what it is now, which is kind of like ad hoc and the team making that decision. So I understand. I mean, today I'm very happy with how we've done and the way we've operated without a token, and I think I I would recommend it for, if I were doing it again, I would do it the exact same way. But I
Yeah.
do think that as you grow and kind of attain product market fit, there are tons of benefits to releasing a token.
I think, Sam, you've obviously spoken to, the long-term goal of what it is that you want to take out of this thing. So, I mean, what is the long-term kind of like, what is your, I mean, dream is kind of like a bit of a cheesy thing to say, but what is your ultimate goal with this project now? Right now, when you look at the horizon, what is it that you want to achieve with this, with Strdy?
Yeah, great question. So I would frame it like this. I would say that if you are a trader right now in crypto, there are a ton of really easy ways for you to get leverage, right? Like you could go on Binance, you could go on GMX, you could go on DYDX, and those are all like very good experiences that will support a range of use cases and different user archetypes. If you are a DeFi farmer, farming yield, there are very few ways for you to get leverage, right? I mean, now there's Strdy, we have some like competitors like Sentiment, um, but there's still like, we're all pretty new and pretty limited. And so really my goal is for Strdy to be the go-to place for like DeFi's best yield farmers to get leverage and kind of grow. Um, that's really what I want to see happen. And I think we've talked somewhat about how to get there. I think there's some other cool things we can do with like synthetic assets and making. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into it, but I think that's kind of
Synthetic
the high level goal.
synthetic assets are like a big thing, because
Yeah,
it's something that is definitely one of the next chapters that will be written in the space. It's like, how do we bring in, Tesla, and how do we bring in all these other instruments that are out there into the DeFi space, and then use those, whether it's leverage, whether it's trading, it doesn't really matter. It's like synthetic assets are definitely something that people are working on, and I think in the next bull market there'll be a thing, absolutely. And then from the governance perspective, it seems like you'd love to be in a position where you know, you obviously still have a part to play, but you don't want to be the one that's making the decisions. You want to be putting that up to community and all that kind of thing. I mean, it seems like it's something that you feel quite strongly about. Obviously, your background and why you were interested in that. Does that fall in line with, you know, letting the community take charge? Let them make the mistakes and let's go along for the ride.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly right. And just, yeah, making sure that the stakeholders are the ones who kind of have that voice through a very formal process. Um, because yeah, right now, like there are certain assets that I'm kind of the team is personally borderline on, right? Where we think like something like convex MIM or something like that, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
well, it's good, like yields are really compelling, but there's also I'd say it's like probably riskier than the other assets we support right now. Like, what's the right call, right? And maybe borrowers love that, and maybe lenders don't like it. It's like, and so how do we navigate that? And I think the answer is that we don't navigate that. We let them do it, and kind of let democracy went out in a transparent process. Um, so yeah, I think totally exactly what you said is spot on.
Yeah. So, I mean, are we saying that, well, are you saying that in terms of releasing a token, it's not completely out of the question? It's something that might happen in the future. It's obviously not something that you guys are thinking of doing now. Maybe it will be Strdy version 3 or 4, but is that something that could come up on the roadmap in the future, or is it just something that you guys haven't really considered? See,
No,
I'm trying to get some alpha here, Sam. I'm just trying.
no, it's definitely on the roadmap for sure.
Okay, cool. Is there like anything out there right now, like in terms of innovation and in terms of product that you looking at? Well, when you look out and you see what at the moment impresses you, like two or three or even one project that you really like look at and say, wow, these guys have really got stuff right here. And you're not allowed to say GMX because everyone says that. Is there anything else besides GMX or any others that you like take your hat off in terms of what it is that they've done?
Yeah, I think it's fine. I was going to say GMX, so you got me there. I mean, even okay, this is a little bit cheating, but some of the projects built on top of GMX I think are cool. I know Rage Trade. I
Yeah.
just saw their new announcement. I think that's super interesting. I would say Arbitrum in general, I'm super impressed with, and I
Mhm.
think it uh, for if no other reason than the fact that they haven't released a token but have been doing incredibly well from an ecosystem. And I don't know if we've seen anyone pull that off to the degree they have, like since
Mhm.
Ethereum mainnet. Like it's been super impressive, and the fact that they're competing with all of these other chains that do have these massive incentives, I think is impressive. So I'm super, yeah, I'm very excited about what they're doing, and I think if such when they do release a token, I think it's just going to like absolutely supercharge it
Mm.
even more to where they are today.
It's almost like what I find really interesting about that is because Grant interviewed Mr. Saunders. I don't call him by his first name. It's definitely Mr. Saunders. He deserves the title of Mr. and soon it will be Sir Saunders. But I mean, he's really like, you know, from a marketing perspective, I actually think in many ways, and he didn't want to really talk about this. It was quite interesting around this airdrop because Grant tried to get information out of him, and it was like it just wasn't. It's kind of like this taboo, you know. And but what's interesting about it is that almost this reluctance to engage with the idea of a token has actually landed up being part and parcel, I believe, of the success. I mean, we went through, I mean, about a month ago where, I mean, you couldn't go anywhere on crypto Twitter where people weren't like doing these airdrop posts. You know, it's kind of like, dude, I don't want to read your airdrop post. It's kind of like I'm immediately blocking people because of like all these things, but it's like really has been a part of their success. It's almost been like, well, there might be a token and there might not be, and maybe there will be. And when it comes, it comes. And if it comes, it will be very different to what it is that you guys were expecting. And I think it's been really a part of their success. You know, I mean, Arbitrum is interesting because it started out as a whale chain. You know, it was kind of like all the whales were there, and you know, like the little guys would get completely like snowed under when these guys were trading. I mean, it was insane, and it hasn't really changed. But what has happened is that they've just got serious volume now, and it works. You know, it works. It's cheap. it's essentially the best of Ethereum, you know, and it's interesting to see how it's going to play out. And imagine during a bull market, I think it's going to be insane.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you'll see like more ETH mainnet projects deploying there too. Yeah, I mean, I'm super excited. I think it's a very interesting ecosystem.
Before you go, because we're almost at the top of the hour, I wanted to just get your thoughts around Aura and where you see Aura going, because I think there's almost like, in many ways, for the not so DeFi savvy people who are looking to invest in stuff and getting interested in the DeFi space, I think Aura is probably one of those things that has probably missed a lot of people. And I wanted to just get your thoughts around what your thoughts were on that project, and why it is that you guys have embarked to do something with them.
Yeah, I mean, we're huge fans of Aura. I think I like the way you framed it. It's very simple, and the risks are somewhat bounded. And by that I mean like there are some sources of yield, and probably Strdy falls into this to some extent, where there's a lot of risks. And so, in order to like kind of understand it, you need to be pretty savvy, right? Like if you're gonna lend USDC on Strdy, I kind of mentioned there's like these third-party risks, so you would need to like be comfortable with Convex and Aura and Lido. And that's somewhat, if you're not familiar with DeFi, and you don't know what projects are reliable and which aren't, that can be a little intimidating. Whereas with Aura, it's much simpler, and like kind of where the yield comes from is very straightforward, and how to use it is very straightforward. So from just like a user and product perspective, I like it. And then I think just in terms of the yields themselves, they're extremely compelling. Like last time I checked, the like WST ETH and our ETH yields for those are like 7-8%, like 9%. I mean, that's really, really good. Just for like naked ETH yields. So yeah, I think we've really enjoyed working with them and are excited to like deepen that relationship for sure.
Yeah, it seems like they are positioning themselves, from a like to be one of the darlings in the DeFi space at the moment. You've got the right people that are talking about them, because at the end of the day, it's like, it's all fine and well that you create a product, but who's actually talking about it? Because there's some really amazing products. I mean, you look at like Metis is a really good example of an amazing ecosystem, and they've done a lot of things right there, but not enough people are talking about them. And because not enough people are talking about them, they're not seeing the success that they would necessarily deserve, just purely because it's not because they don't have good tech or they don't have cheap transactions and the rest of it. It's like, who's talking about it? Whereas when you look at Aura and you look at what they're doing, everyone who's got big bags are talking about them. And it's not necessarily because they've got big bags of Aura. Like a lot of people kind of get it wrong. Like a lot of the stuff that I talk about all the time, I don't have an investment in it. It's like, I don't have an investment in Strdy because Strdy doesn't have a token, but Strdy is fulfilling a role that is really important around this, particularly on leverage from borrowing and lending. I mean, that's what really is compelling about what it is that you guys are doing. What does GMX do? GMX is the next narrative for decentralized exchanges and how that mechanism works. And you've got, I saw like the Dopex guys are looking to also set up a decentralized exchange. So it's all about that innovation. It's all about who's talking about it, and as soon as you start having, like Strdy starts having, like the tetranodes of this world talking about your product, and I'm getting good returns, I'm getting good yields, my money's safe, it's been audited correctly, that's when you essentially become, Aave version 3 or version 4, or, and that's what I think it's, if I was building a project, that's what I would be aiming to do. So here's to people talking about Strdy, and, well done for what it is that you guys have done without launching a token. Really, it's impressive, and I really look forward to seeing how you guys navigate your next chapter, even though it's chapter 2. I know you want to call it chapter 1. I'll call it 2. Pleasure to have you on, sir.
Yeah, thanks again. Thanks for all the great questions. I appreciate it.
Cool, man. And yeah, maybe we can do this sometime in the future, call you in and check in on you guys. Maybe I'll get a message at some point where, listen, we might be ready to launch a token, and then we can chat again, or whatever it might be that you guys come up with. Maybe you'll launch an exchange when you're done with this and you let the community take over. Who knows? But yeah, good to have you on, sir. And yeah, take it easy, and thanks for your time. I really appreciate you coming on and speaking to us today.
Yeah, thank you too. Take care.